No.
Went flip the other way.
Good evening and welcome to the City of Battle Creek, Michigan and our Battle Creek City Commission workshop. I first want to start out by thanking Linda Morrison. This will be Linda's last budget workshop. Linda, how many have there been in a row?
Well, I've been here 28 years, 23 years, so I've done 10 of these.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We will miss you in the event when you're retired and you want to come back for the budget workshop. There's an open invitation for you.
Fun.
Is there anyone here that would like to start out with public comment? Any public comment at the beginning of the meeting? We'll also reserve a spot at the end of the meeting for public comment. And because of that, I'm going to now turn it over to Rebecca and allow her to do her thing.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. I wanted to make a joke about May the 4th be with you. Do you get that?
Yeah.
So that's why we're here. May the 4th be with us while we go through the budget proposal for the commission. So thank you very much, Mayor and Commissioners. I know we have a couple that are absent, but most of us have gone through the budget with every one of you. So we're going to move through things quickly, but you certainly can ask questions as we go along. Vicki, are you the clicker tonight?
Yes, I am. Are
Could you
you
go to the
ready?
agenda, please?
Oh, the agenda?
No, not the agenda for the presentation in the PowerPoint.
Okay, yes.
One more. Great, thank you. This is our agenda for tonight. Again, we're going to move through things pretty quickly, and we're going to tag team. So between Aaron, myself, and Ted, we will be covering the slides. So let us know if you need us to stop. Slide, please. So this first part is the kind of the where we are in the current fiscal year, our estimates and estimated use of fund balance for the fiscal year 23, which would end June 30th of 23, and I'm going to turn it over to Aaron. Next slide, please. Yep, thanks.
Thank you. So estimates are just that, estimates. So estimates are our best guess as finance and departments about what is going to happen, but in all actuality, anything could happen. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry.
She's on the right side.
Okay. Yep, you're on the right side. So estimates show use of fund balance of nearly 1.3 million. This is compared for fiscal year 23. This is compared to a use of fund balance in the budget that the commission adopted for fiscal year 23 of 3.6 million. The positive swing in revenue estimates is due primarily to income tax revenues defying expectations by projecting to be 1.88 million in excess of the budget. Additionally, there has been a good increase in the amount received from state revenue sharing thanks to state revenue holding steady and a projected surplus in their budget. There also has been an increase in interest income. This will continue on an upward trajectory as the city takes a more active approach to investing. Year-end budget adjustment will come before the commission at the second meeting in June. Staff likes to get as close to the end of the fiscal year as possible before requesting amendments to the budget. Next slide, please. Tab 3 of the budget book is a summary of the general fund revenues, which are estimated at 53.9 million for fiscal 23. Tab 4 has expanded detail of the information in tab 3. Tab 5 is a summary of general fund expenses, which are estimated to be 55.2 million for fiscal year 23. Tab 6 has the expanded detail of the information on the general fund expenses. Tab 7 shows a projected unassigned fund balance for the general fund of 12.9 million at June 30th of 23, which is 23.9% of estimated revenue, in excess of the city's 17% fund balance policy. I would also like to point out the budget document is available on the city website in the budget section on the finance page.
Any questions about the estimates before we go on to kind of our assumptions for the new year?
I would just ask that y'all speak into the mic a little closer.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I know we're so used to looking at that or our notes, so we'll try to move closer. Appreciate that. Moving into the proposal for fiscal year 24, you know, we always come into a new budget year with some assumptions. amongst all of our funds. We want to make sure that the commission is aware of what those look like for the proposal for fiscal year '24. Thanks, Vicki. We see a 5.2% growth in taxable value. You can see the last graph on tab 10 to be able to get a pictorial representation of that. Really, that translates into the property tax revenue growth in our general fund. As you know, the general fund really holds all of our operating expenses, and it's the one that's most referenced when people talk about the city's budget. So that's the one we really do keep close tabs on. Not that the other funds aren't important. I know some of you out there on other funds, they are important, but we really do watch the general fund closely. But we also have the streets, capital project funds, and component units as part of our growth areas and assumptions. The general fund budget does include support from the Downtown Development Authority, so that's really what people refer to as the Central Business District. It's a TIF district is what the DDA is, and it continues to budget its share of our debt service for projects that were within the DDA boundary. That's the quiet zone at $180,000, as well as the capital improvement bonds, in the capital improvement bonds, excuse me. So in the Central Business District, also all of the nice maintenance that you see out there, that is in support from the DDA. So the Central Business District street maintenance that Todd Gerber and his team oversee, that's about $904,000. And then they contribute $197,000 for 75% of the police department's 2 downtown officers. We are proposing in the fiscal year '24 budget to add an additional downtown officer. I mean, I think that's a good sign. We're starting to see traffic in the downtown, great events, anticipating the opening of McKinley Hotel. Kellogg Arena seems to be very full. Certainly New Holland is bringing additional foot traffic downtown, and we just feel the necessity to add a downtown officer. We also know there are some nefarious activities happening in the parking ramps, as they are not as full as they used to be. And this officer, as well as some additional security contract that we have, will help in those areas as well. And I know they do a really good job of relationship building with the businesses down there. So they're walking in and out of businesses. What are you seeing? I know just recently at the last DDA meeting, businesses were concerned about panhandlers coming, pretty aggressive. And so we got to talk a little bit about what our panhandling ordinance looks like and how the police can be more proactive in that area. Another assumption in the budget is that the IT includes ramping up of our 311 information center. I know it says call center, and they do call. I've always called it information center because really that's kind of the first touch point that anyone would have as they call into the city. And we've gotten a lot of kudos about that because now they have a central number to call. They know where to send people, so you don't necessarily get transferred 3 or more times trying to find the right person or a person to speak with. And we hope in the next fiscal year that we will take on the Department of Public Works phone traffic. That is a lot of phone traffic, and I appreciate Steve Skalski and his team and Jarrett and all helping us work with our 311 operators and information techs to how best to answer those calls and how they can route them through the Department of Public Works. Next slide, please.
Rebecca, can I have
Absolutely.
a question on one of the assumptions on the 5.2% growth in
Yes.
taxable value? I know it was capped as far as the increase is 5%. What do we project that other 2%? Just growth in new construction or additions or that kind of thing?
Uncappings due to high real estate transactions in the city over the
Okay.
course of the year.
So that's that
So
additional.
that causes an uncapping. I know me personally, my taxable value went up 25% because I bought a new house in Battle Creek, so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Still on assumptions. There is a $1.7 million ARPA lost revenue inclusion in our fiscal year '24 budget proposal. We are very fortunate that we still have ARPA to be able to utilize because we still do feel impacts of the pandemic. Particularly, you'll see, and I'm going to talk about the parking fund. I think the word that finance likes to use right now is dismal. You might see that a couple times. That's one of those funds that just is struggling because of the lack of traffic downtown, and we don't have as many people coming into work that need to park in the ramps. So I know that the small business team and Ted and the parking committee are working on ways to think differently about the parking revenue to try to encourage more people downtown and to use surface lots or outlots and not right next to the building, although people do like to be as close as they can. So thinking outside of the box around parking and what we can do there. And then we also have the addition of $300,000 out of that ARPA loss revenue in the solid waste fund. At the advisement and direction of the commission, we will cover that cost in the solid waste fund using ARPA dollars. This budget also includes a 4% cost of living increase for all non-represented employees, as well as step increases, as well as the wages that are already bargained for in our collective bargaining agreements. Our revenue numbers also include all of the assumptions that our department directors have made in regards to the fee bond and insurance schedule. That was a really good question asked by one of our commissioners about the relationship between the fee bond and insurance schedule and the revenue numbers that are in the proposal. And so please know that they'll address those when they come and talk about their proposal, but they certainly are linked. Next slide, please, Vicki. Also in our proposal, we have a couple of special requests. We get special requests every year around budget time. I wish that I could say yes to all of them. The budget team wishes we could say yes to all of them, but we really do have to match revenues with expenditures. So right now, what's in the proposal is 2 police officers at Bronson Battle Creek, which are 100% reimbursed by Bronson. 1 additional school resource officer in the Lakeview schools, which is 80% reimbursed by the school district. We added the Assistant Revenue Services Director position during our time of ARPA early on. And also, I think many of you know, we had to make some very difficult cuts early on in the pandemic, and we eliminated, in excess of 22 jobs. What we've realized since that moment in time, not only have the numbers come in differently, we always do our best to forecast, but you're never going to get that right on the spot. And even the state is telling us we don't really have a good answer in why the income tax revenue wasn't as low as everybody had anticipated. We're very glad of that. But we still we still have to provide the service, the level of service that's expected from the commission as well as the community. And we realized there were areas that we cut too deep. So we've made those adjustments. Finance is one of them, the Assistant Revenue Services Director position. Income tax is another one. So we've added an additional compliance auditor, and then we've added the fire inspector position in the fire department. We know that the current fire marshal has a workload more than can be handled by one particular person, and so we hope that the addition of this position is helpful to the department. I know there's active discussions between Chief Beatty and IAFF about what this looks like, and we look forward to welcoming that position into the fiscal year 24 budget. Any questions about, yes, Commissioner Ballard?
Thank you. When you say 100% reimbursed from the police department for 2 officers, is that just their salary or is that their insurance?
Salary and benefits.
Everything? And retirement?
Yes, sir. We enter into a contract with Bronson to do that. And I think, Chief Bagley, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think from the school's perspective, they're grant funding their school resource officers. That's why it's 80%, 20%. Okay, I get to turn the next part, which is our general fund budget recommendation, over to Ted.
Great, thank you, Rebecca, and good evening, commissioners. Vicki, you can, okay, great, you moved to the next slide, thank you. So actually tab 2 in your book provides an overview of the millage recommendation for fiscal year 24. And as commissioners are probably familiar with, the overall millage is made up of certain components. The operating millage, which is primarily what supports our general fund, as well as the capital projects debt millage, the streets millage, and of course the police and fire retirement millage that you see there. And so this year we are expecting an increase of 0.255 in the police and fire retirement millage. That increase overall then is reflected in the overall millage rate. And Vicki, if you go to the next slide, if you would, please. So after, roughly 2 years of the police and fire millage declining, we are expecting an increase this year. And that is the result of a difficult market last year. And that has resulted in a reduction in what we're anticipating in terms of return on our investment. And so that is impacting the police and fire millage for this upcoming year. If you look at the bottom of, go ahead to the next slide if you would, Vicki. Now let's go back to that first one there. before we jump into that one. Right, so if you look at the bottom of this slide too, you can see that the increase in the overall millage rate is reflected in terms of what it would mean to a homeowner based on a certain level of taxable value. The rest of the slide has some interesting information. You can see the overall revenue generated by the separate components of the millage, and then how much unavailable, or available millage, I should say, we have left over based on what the city is allowed to allocate in any given year. Okay, so you can go to the next slide if you would, Vicki. So this slide actually provides an overview of the history of our millage components over time, and as you can see here, due to the primarily due to the police and fire millage changes, the total millage has increased by 1.837 since 2006. Now that assumes that the total millage increase this year is allowed as a result of floating the police and fire millage. And you can see during that same period of time, the operating millage has actually increased, or it decreased actually, 1.743 mils. And if the police and fire millage is actually absorbed by the operating millage offset, you know, like we have done in some previous years, that actually reduces the overall growth amount in the millage to about 1.6 mils, but it decreases the operating millage over that period of time to almost 2 mils. So Vicki, if you go to the next slide. And here you can see that in graphic representation. So this slide's a little bit different because it actually reads, you should look at it right to left. And you can see that the orange section is growing over time, which represents the police and fire millage, and that the green section, which represents the operating millage, has actually been declining over time. And we only point this out for the commission because obviously the operating millage, as we mentioned a little earlier, generally supports the general fund, and those are where we fund our critical services, like, for example, police and fire operations. And so clearly, if we stay on this trend over time, eventually the city's general fund will be challenged to provide some of those critical services. And we know that the voters have implemented the police and fire millage without a limit, but we just want to make sure that commissioners are aware of the impact of absorbing the changes in the police and fire millage in the operating millage. And I think I am kicking it back to Aaron.
Thanks, Ted. So our general fund is funded by a three-legged stool of income sources: property tax, income tax, and state revenue sharing, which collectively comprise 79% of our general fund revenue. The proposed income tax revenue is less conservative than it has been in previous years. This is partly due to a trend upward in both fiscal year 22 and 23, and a 2.9% increase is proposed for fiscal year 24. For property tax, as the city manager indicated, a 5.2% increase in taxable value translated to approximately $1.5 million in revenue, increase in revenue and property tax. And this helped to soften the blow of the increased contribution rate to the police and fire pension. State revenue sharing has a projected 3.75% increase from the fiscal year 23 estimate to total proposed revenue of $7.65 million. Next slide, please. As previously discussed, the proposed income tax revenue budget is less conservative than previous years, with a 2.9% increase for fiscal year 24 proposed over fiscal year 22 actual. Besides the dip in fiscal year 21, income tax has been on an upward trajectory as a whole. Income tax estimates are something that our internal budget team talk about at nearly every one of our committee meetings, so it's constantly being monitored by city staff throughout the year. Next slide, please. Oh, okay, there we go. Proposed fund balance is 22.1% of estimated revenues at June 30th of 24, which is in excess of our 17% fund balance policy. As previously noted, the fiscal year 24 budget incorporates $1.7 million in ARPA lost revenue, which is the remaining amount of lost revenue to be obligated. The general fund budget includes $1.75 million in debt service expenses. The transfer to the transit fund is up to just a little over $1 million, and this represents the city's portion of the local match for federal transit operating funds. The transfer to the airport fund is $499,000 for the year, and that does not include $396,000 coming from ARPA. Next slide, please. As you can see, there's a projected use of fund balance of nearly 1.3 million in fiscal '23 and 614,000 in fiscal '24. Projected general fund balance is proposed to be 12.9 million at the end of this fiscal year and 12.3 million at the end of the '24 fiscal year. Just as a matter of note, the city has added to fund balance in fiscal year 19, 20, 21, and 22, leading up to this use of fund balance. So the only thing I really want to highlight here is the estimates for both revenues and expenses of 55.5 million for proposed revenue in the general fund for next year. Next slide, please. And then 56.1 million in proposed expenses for next year. Next slide, please.
Okay, before we get into our department director presentations, and these are in alphabetical order, so it's not, you know, that, no offense, Phil, it's not that the airport is the greatest at number one. We just did alphabetical because we didn't. Airport is great, don't get me wrong, airport is great. But you have to understand, most of the expenditures in any of our budgets have to do with personnel. Salary and fringes are a big chunk, and, you know, I'll talk about my own department in a minute, but we don't generate revenue for the city, we just use it. And so we, you know, in that respect, we have very little control over our expenses when certainly we have proposed increases for non-reps and we have collective bargaining agreements, you know, that are already built into these particular budgets. Some of the other, you know, kind of out of our control things is our contribution to pension funds. So we just talked about the police and fire pension and how that's calculated and it's gone up. The MERS pension is the same. You know, the market did not do well, and, you know, our pension funds, both of them rely on that. But also, when they changed their assumptions, as both of them did recently, that just makes our required contribution higher. And so when you have someone like the city manager's office or the city attorney's office with, you know, only 7 people or only 5 people, when you have a large increase in what you have to contribute to the MERS pension fund, you know, that's something that you have no control over, but it is included in their budgets. So in some areas where you see budgets have gone up, it has to do with a lot of things out of our control. It is what it is based on the salary and benefits we provide our employees. And this commission has said how important that is in regards to retaining the pension systems that we have, even though they can be very expensive. You know, municipalities jumped on board early, you know, after the 2010, 8 to 10 recession, to get rid of those so that you don't have those large liabilities on your books. However, it's taken a toll on the ability to retain and attract employees into municipalities. So we are hearing, particularly on the east side of the state, where those who have gotten rid of the defined benefit are now bringing it back as a tool to retain and attract. So, you know, those are some things that are just really out of our control when we talk about what expenses look like for departments, particularly that are really, really heavy in personnel, salary, and benefits. So with that being said, Phil Kroll from the airport is up first. Department directors are going to talk a little bit about differences between the current fiscal year and the next fiscal year, and any highlights that they would like to share.
Awesome. Thank you, Rebecca. Good evening, commissioners.
Good evening.
I will do my best to keep this as brief as I can, but give you as much of an understanding as I can also share. So I'll start off with our changes, and I'm just reading from this, so sorry if I'm not looking up. Really our changes from our FY23 or current fiscal year to our proposed budget in FY24. We're starting to see, like, you know, many buildings, the current building that we're in, or current buildings that we operate, the airport itself, the infrastructure we have at the airport, several maintenance issues, so a lot of the expenses that we see are relating to fixing or maintaining the current infrastructure that we have. We do have some technology updates that we're hoping to implement and train some staff on to alleviate some of these issues. A lot of the things, whether it's a cataloging and categorizing or triaging some of the issues so that we can get a better understanding on what things are not working and if they're constantly not working, or if they're something new, or it's something that we need to spend more dollars on to fix, or if it's something that we just need to get some new piece of equipment for. We do have some projected revenue changes in our fee bond and insurance. We're requesting increases in our landing fees. Anything over 8,000 pounds, so anything basically bigger than a single engine piston aircraft, we're requesting 4% increases. 1% of that would go to cover the service that we use to collect those landing fees, and the other 3% would again go towards what the landing fees are supposed to be used for, which is really airport maintenance, infrastructure maintenance. We tend to, or the airport tends to increase those annually, and we increased those 3% from last year. We're also increasing some badge replacements, $10 to $15, depending on the occurrence, if this is a first or a second offense. Those haven't been increased in 8 years, or we're requesting to increase those. Besides that, I do have specifics on if there's any specific budget questions in terms of the airport, or if there's any specific numbers that you would need. I also forgot to put in there, each year, depending on the lease, we can, how the lease is negotiated, we usually have a CPI increase for each of those leases. It's capped at 3%, so even though CPI has been going up 8, 5, 7, 10%, we're, for the most part, a lot of these leases that were implemented 10, 15, 20 years ago when you weren't seeing those is capped at 3%. So we kind of struggle with a 3% increase and still seeing 8 to 10% CPI increases. So we do see some increased revenue from that annually, but obviously it's just tough to keep up with inflation. So that is all I have, unless there's obviously
Perfect,
any
Philip.
questions.
Perfect.
Fantastic. And I had no one to go off of, so I'm glad
Any
that's
questions
good.
of Phil, real quick? I don't see. Thank you.
The only thing I want to add to the airport budget is, and I did note this to commissioners, is this is the first full fiscal year that we're proposing that the general fund covers the operating expenses at the airport. It had been covered by the TIFA before, but certainly they are seeing revenue reduction. So basically, Ted, Joe, and I, and Phil all agreed we'd give this a try and see what happens. We both need to watch our fund use there, but the capital expenditures for the airport are still being borne by the TIFA. So just wanted you to know that's the big difference. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you.
Good job.
Good evening. City Attorney's budget is primarily personnel and expenses. We don't have programs, we don't do, I mean, we just do the basics, and so 94.3% of our budget is personnel and fringe benefits, pension. We have 6 employees in our department. One, the prosecution office assistant, was furloughed during COVID. When we brought that position back, we brought it back at 20 hours. We increased it to 25 hours a week last year. And so I'm proposing to increase that to 32 hours a week for this new budget. So that's one difference. The allocation from IT includes only the cost of a desktop, and especially during COVID, we've really found that having a laptop is important. So there's an extra amount that I've had to put in the budget to have a laptop for one of the computers that's being replaced in this fiscal year. And other than that, you know, the pension group for the city attorney and the city manager, that contribution from the city swings pretty wildly from year to year because it's such a small group, and paying for those that have retired. So it's like a 0.5% higher for personnel in this budget. So that's pretty much it. Not a lot to talk about for mine. Anybody have any questions?
No, but thank you very much, Jill. Any questions of Jill?
Actually do.
Chris.
And I think Rebecca and I had this discussion at our monthly meeting about having the city attorney's office bring some things in-house like prosecution, if we would change our ordinances rather than sending off to another jurisdiction, maybe be able to keep some revenues. Have we considered that at all?
We do our own prosecution.
He's talking about the code. I see Marcy's little eyes sparkling. It's about bringing code and running our own administrative.
Whatever we can, yes.
That's what we had talked about.
Like running an administrative, like the municipal bureau?
Yes.
You know, I gathered a lot of information about that a number of years ago and checked with other municipalities on what they do and the cost, and I'm happy to start those discussions. If Marcy is, it's actually in our ordinance already.
Okay.
To be able to do that, to have a municipal bureau. You know, now the code hearings are done by Zoom, which had continued after COVID, but what I had done when I moved our prosecution team out of the Justice Center, we set up our own pretrial room downstairs in the code area, and really found Marcy and her team thought that it worked out really well because you know, there's so much downtime over at court, and so she was having to send her officers, her code officers over there for hearings, and there'd just be a lot of hurry up and wait. When we have it here, they could go about their business and then go downstairs when it was time for whatever case they were on. And as I said, those are Zoom now. But yeah, we're perfectly willing to talk about doing that.
I'd be supportive of that. And I would assume that the revenues, if we had any fines or fees, would stay in-house rather than going out to some other jurisdiction.
Right, but remember, you've got to bring in a hearing officer, got to hire a
Understand.
hearing officer for that. But yeah, so we could let Marcy do a lot of that.
Okay. Thanks, Jill.
Yes,
Anything else, Jill?
my pleasure.
Thank you, Jill.
Thanks. Next up is the city manager budget. So we really oversee two budgets. One is the city commission's budget, and the other is the actual city manager budget. There is an increase in the commission budget, not for what you might think, but it has to do with memberships. So I know that MML has increased their membership fee. Well, everybody's increased their membership fees, let's just be honest. And then last year we did the whole priority-based budgeting redo. And so that was, when we do consultants and things of that nature, that usually goes into the commission budget. But also we had an uptick in commissioners taking advantage of some of the training and travel money that we have, particularly to the Michigan Municipal League events. So we hope that that continues, because I think they really enjoyed that. So that's really what's in the city commission budget, is really about memberships, payments to the commissioners, as well as travel and training, and any consultants that we might use. In the city manager's budget, very similar to the city attorney's budget, we have 7 employees, all full-time, so most of our expenditures have to do with salary and benefits. We do have 2 new staff for the first time in a full fiscal year. That would be our second communications person, as well as our diversity, equity, inclusion officer. So those have already been included in our proposal. Also, the MERS contribution, as Jill said, ours is probably the most expensive MERS group because there's only 2 active employees in it. So we are the only 2 positions contributing to it and trying to support all those that have retired before us. So it's usually when MERS goes up, we feel that increase quite large in both the city attorney's budget as well as the city manager's budget. We have in comms, we have tried to be very innovative when it comes to our communications team, our use of social media, changing up things, how we do our newsletter. We also budget a pretty heavy amount for translation and interpretation. We're moving more away from the city managers taking that to more of the departments managing that. What does it look like by department for translation and interpretation? And then all of the things that we provide to the comms team, like Hootsuite and social media, archiving, and then we launched Textedly, and it's been very successful, the text messages that people can opt into. And so those are some of the differences between our current fiscal year and the fiscal year forward for the manager's office. Are there any questions?
Doesn't appear any. Thank you very much, Rebecca.
You're welcome. Vicki?
So for the city clerk's office, we have 3 different business units. There's the city clerk's department, which is most of my staff, and then it includes FOIAs, licensing, meeting support, such as that. The other one is elections, and then the third one is for civil service, where we assist the fire department with their promotional and entry-level testing. That's going to pretty much stay the same. It's every other year that we do the entry level, but that doesn't see much fluctuation. The biggest fluctuation we're going to have this year is in elections. In February, we will experience for the first time our 9 days of early voting. We will need to find a location to hold the 9 days of early voting, somewhere that is large enough to actually facilitate a minimum of 600 voters per day. And staffing for that would be probably 5 inspectors and at least 1 person from the clerk's office. So you've got a lot of extra hours and then a location that we will need to pay for also. So that's where all of my increase is.
Questions of Vicki? Yes.
She raised her hand first.
So the 9 days of voting, what are, like, is this 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. or is this like a 9 to 5? I mean, I'm just trying to get a handle on,
So the new
Hours.
law requires that we provide early voting 9 days for 8 hours each day.
8 hours.
And we anticipate doing that from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. every day. And then whoever is in line at 4 o'clock, we do have to keep the polls open for those people to vote also.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I was just looking at the budget, the same thing. It's almost practically doubled on the dollar value because of this new law, and it's unfortunate that we have to ask the taxpayers of Battle Creek to cover something that was perfectly fine before, but to add 9 extra days 3 times a year. So I applaud you in finding a way to get this financed under, I mean, we have to. So the other thing is that hopefully you can find enough workers to want to work those days, because it is hard being an election worker. I've done it myself. I'll give a shout out there. It's really nice to see it happen, though. So consider, if you want to spend a day helping out the city by being an election worker, it is a humbling job to find out what exactly takes place behind the scenes. It's a lot of it's dramatized in the public. So it is very rewarding at the end of the day. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. All right, next.
Mercy, Community Services.
Good evening, everyone. The Community Services Department is made up of 4 divisions. We have Code Compliance, Community Development, Inspections, and Planning and Zoning. So I will work through all 4 of those for you. So I may take just a little bit more time than a couple of the others, but I'll talk very fast. The Code Compliance Division has 6 full-time employees in addition to 3 full-time employees that are shared with the Inspections Division. That funding source for the operations are Community Development Block Grant Funds, Solid Waste Enterprise Funds, General Fund, and also revenue that's generated from our vacant and abandoned registration, and also our rental registration and inspection program. From an operating standpoint, what you'll see throughout the years from a revenue standpoint is that there are highs and lows, and that really is dependent on the cycles of inspections, because registration for rental, for example, are on 3- and 6-year cycles. So those properties register on those cycles. So you'll see a high where we'll have a lot of registrations, and then we won't register that property for 3 more years. So it does a little bit of up and down. So when you see fluctuation over a period of time, that's the reason why. With regards to programming, we're excited for next fiscal year to be able to launch the paint program. We actually intend to do that starting in June. This is a program that we offered to the community pre-COVID. And what happened during that time is that our supplier of paint, which was a local supplier that recycled paint, no longer is operational. And so we had to find another supplier and have a community partner to be able to do that. So this will be a resource that will be available to property owners in the community that have a need for paint, and it's not based on income requirements, which is very nice. In addition to that, we will continue our 3-year cycle of property surveys that we do citywide. We will be implementing the hotel, motel, communal kitchen program, and staff will be working to achieve their International Code Council certification, which overall just increases their professional development. For the Community Development Division, there are 8 full-time employees and 7 different funding sources, all of which are grant funded. We have our Community Development Block Grant and our Home Grant, which we receive because we're an entitlement community. We have our Lead Hazard Control Grant, our HUD Healthy Homes Grant, our CHIP Medicaid Lead Safe Program Grant, our CARES Act Fund, and certainly our Home ARP funds that we received as a community. From an operating standpoint, one of the challenges is that with each of those grants, there is a designated amount that you are allowed to charge for administrating that grant. And so one of the challenges is as our personnel and fringe benefit packages increase, those amounts, we're really hitting those ceilings. So we're getting very close. We still are able to certainly operate within that percentage of amount allocated, but it's getting a little bit tight. So that'll be something that we'll have to keep an eye on. In regards to programming, as you're aware, we continue to do our annual action plan that'll come before you on May 2nd for adoption. We also align our priorities for our 5-year consolidated plan with our priority-based budgeting priorities. With regards to CDBG CV funds, we've programmed those dollars in the fall of 2022. We have a small amount left. Those remaining funds are for housing case management, which is currently being provided by Neighborhoods Incorporated. Our home ARP funds are used to fund development of permanent supportive housing and various homeless prevention programming. Those are provided for by Haven of Rest, Battle Creek Share Center, Battle Creek Shelter, Gracious Homes, and Neighborhoods Incorporated. And the city is administering a homes program, and we're expected to will result in 124 rehabbed and lead remediated housing units. Those projects range from 2,000 to 80,000, and 95% of those projects will preserve and make safe our current housing. 75% of those projects will be homeowner occupied, 25% renter occupied. With regards to the inspections division, there are 6 full-time employees in addition to the 3 that I mentioned that are hybrid for code compliance and inspections. The funding source is an enterprise fund, which means it's self-sustaining. The amount of revenue that we receive for permitting and inspection fees covers the full cost of operations. From a programming standpoint, we will be looking to launch an e-plan software, which will allow us to improve our digital plan submission and review. Continuing to update our templates and form letters and offering those in translation for Spanish and Burmese, as we have already done for all of our trade permits. Increase our online permitting services. We're going to create a kiosk area in our first floor office so that residents can come in and do service and receive support from staff to be able to do online permitting, which we've heard is a convenience for the community. Continue our pre-development meetings, and then our inspection staff, similar to our code compliance staff, will be looking to work toward their International Code Council certification as well. Lastly, we have the Planning and Zoning Division, and that is 5 full-time employees. This is funded by the general fund, and we do receive nominal fees which cover publication for special requests. So variance requests, special use permits, we have to do publication for those, so we receive fees to be able to cover those costs of publication. Where you'll see an increase this year in particular related to the general fund for this division is that we increased our personnel to be back at the same level of operations that we had pre-COVID. So during the COVID, as Rebecca mentioned, planning was one of the divisions that was drastically reduced, and we have rebuilt that to meet the needs of the community, and we now are fully staffed as we were pre-COVID. So we see staffing increases for that, and then we also have, you'll see in our personnel expenditures, it does account for our marijuana coordinator, but please note that the cost, personnel cost for the coordinator is covered by the revenue that we generate off of marijuana licensing. In regards to highlights for 2024, we are looking at reviewing and updating the master plan, implementation of our non-motorized transportation plan, continuing our redevelopment ready certification, create a strategic plan for disposing of our city-owned parcels, online plan submission for site plan, analysis of our marijuana licensing, and lastly, a historic district education and awareness campaign. It's important to note that the revenue projections that you see for each one of these divisions does not take into account any proposed recommended increases in the fee bond and insurance schedule. When we prepared our revenues very early in the year, that certainly was in advance of the review of fee bond and insurance, and we did not want to make any assumptions as to what commission may pass or not pass with the review of that.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Well, any questions of Marcy? No questions?
I guess you mentioned the communal kitchens, and it remains to be seen how that's going to shake out once it goes live. So what's your budgetary consideration? So nobody takes advantage of that, and then we're going to go ahead and implement actually enforcing the hotel and motel ordinance. Is that taken into account in your budget?
Yes, that would be the action taken if we had no individuals that chose to create communal kitchens to allow for long-term stays by creating those amenities. We would then work with the property owners to enforce long-term stay requirements of the ordinance.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Rebecca?
Mayor. Department of Public Works. So we have our new director, Steve Skalski. He's got his team in case he needs any help, because this is his first time.
Yes, I had no hand in the creating of this budget, so it was all done before me. The Department of Public Works budget draws revenue dollars from multiple sources, such as Act 51, state, federal grants, and enterprise funds, to name a few, and is broken up into several different sections. General fund, major streets and trunk lines, local streets, major and local street capital projects, auto parking system, sewer and water, solid waste collection, and equipment center. General fund is utilized for maintenance work in areas such as the parks, linear path, central business district, cemeteries, street lighting, and stormwater. Additional revenue comes from the DDA and intergovernmental casino revenue sharing. Major streets and trunk lines and the local streets funds. These funds utilize Act 51 revenue and encompass field service divisions work within the right-of-way, as well as the traffic division's work on signs and signals. Additionally, this is where the budget is located for any equipment rental for DPW. The Major Streets and Trunk Lines Fund has been operating in an effort to build fund balance for the future construction of a new salt dome over the last few years, construction of which will take place in fiscal year 24. Major and local streets capital projects funds. These funds pertain to all of the city's capital improvement projects that are not related to water and wastewater. These projects were discussed at the February 21st Commission presentation by DPW and include local rehabs, milling, and resurfacing of the Piper Park area, chip sealing the numbered streets from Columbia to Gogwak, and the local matching dollars for the Union Street Bridge project. DPW is proposing it to utilize a higher amount of fund balance for fiscal year 24 as the larger balance has been carried forward due to the limited availability to perform work during COVID. Auto Parking System Fund. This fund incorporates the downtown parking structures and lots. Design work is currently underway for some repairs to the structures. This fund has been subsidized by ARPA in FY23 and is proposed for 24. Change in fee bond insurance schedule is currently under review by DPW, Ted Deering, and John Hart, with the goal of finding out how to replace lost revenue for downtown parking impacted by COVID. Sewer and water funds. Sewer and water funds include the operational and capital improvement projects. During FY24, sewer is proposing work on items such as solids composting, and water's proposing work on the well field at Verona, as well as increased effort in lead service replacements. As with the street capital projects, there's an increase in number of projects in order to catch up with the work that was limited during COVID. Fee bond and insurance schedule has been adjusted based off the 21 rate study, which included rates through June of 26. Changes for fiscal year 24 were based off the rate study's proposal at a 4.25% increase for both water and sewer. Solid Waste Collection Fund. The Solid Waste Fund was brought to Commission for a workshop previously on April 11th to discuss fuel surcharges impacting the budget. ARPA funds have been utilized to help offset the costs associated with the fuel surcharges in 23 and more are proposed in 24. As of now, there are no changes to the fee bond insurance schedule, though a long-term solution will need to be identified after FY26. Equipment Center Fund. The Equipment Center budget has been set at a similar rate as FY23, though there are some increases associated with equipment part cost, inflation, and availability. In FY24, fleet is planned to purchase a fire engine, police vehicles, as well as new vehicles and equipment at DPW for added team members.
Steve? Thank you very much. Did you write those comments, or were those handed to you? too?
Those were me. That's all me.
Very good. I also want to say thank you very much, and especially to Todd Gerber, for the work on the penetrator, I-194, when you cleaned it with the sweepers and the dump trucks and the bulldozer, and you guys did a great job.
Well, thank you
You
very
really
much.
did. And I want to make sure you know that.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions of Steve?
I do, Mayor. Thank you. I keep asking about sidewalks, and all I ever hear is we don't have any money for sidewalks. Where is the money for sidewalks in this budget?
Where is the money for sidewalks in this budget? Do we have any money for sidewalks in the budget?
No, we never have any money for sidewalks.
No, actually, when I first got here, there was a general fund allotment for sidewalks. But when the general fund was pinched, that was one of the things that left. The other area I've seen sidewalks come from is our risk fund, being self-insured. That was another area. And as our funds get stronger, we try to address those areas. And, you know, I think there is a master list of sidewalks somewhere, if I could just state that we're always looking at, try to supplement funds for. So I think there are a few in this budget, but certainly not, it's going to take us a bit to catch up.
Thank you.
Sure.
All you need is 4 more votes. All right, Rebecca.
Thanks, I appreciate that. Chief Beatty from the Fire Department, and this is his first budget workshop with the commission as well.
Phil left 2 minutes on the table, so I'm claiming them for myself.
Yeah, but Marcy went over, so really, I'm just kidding. Kidding.
And yesterday, she yelled at me and said that mine was too long.
Yeah.
I see what you did there.
Welcome to the city.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Manager Fleury, thank you for having us. Something new for FY24 that the Fire Department did was we implemented a committee approach to developing our budget. We did that to promote continuity of operations as well as staff development. This is something that was identified that had been lacking within the Fire Department. Several of the members that participated are in the back row there hanging out, and I appreciate them staying with the process to this point. We are 100% supported by the general fund. Our FY24 budget represents an 8.5% increase from the adopted 23 budget, but is actually $28,000 lower than the estimated end-of-year budget for FY23. We were able to increase our capacity in community risk reduction, or our fire prevention efforts, as well as tools and equipment for the emergency services, as most of our stuff is highly specialized, and when you throw fire or EMS in front of it, it starts adding zeros after or in front of decimal points. Emergency medical response is 70% of our incidents, but we must remain proficient in everything that we do for all of our calls, especially the high-risk, low-frequency calls. Our training budget saw a significant increase to be able to account for that. Many components of our service, such as our apparatus, our firefighting protective gear, and air packs are driven by standards, regulations, and guidelines from outside entities. There's 2 or 3 different state departments that have their hooks into us for things we must comply with. The Firefighter Training Council, MIOSHA, Health and Human Services, the National Fire Protection Association, as well as ISO, or the Insurance Services Organization. They were here today, by the way. While we don't live to satisfy ISO, their guidelines provide a pretty good indication as to where we stand within the city, and they are a benefit to the members of the community for their insurance rates. So the better rating that we can get and provide for them, it is a benefit for them. We increased several GL lines to cover matching amounts if we're awarded a couple of grants that we've applied for, and we also implemented, or are going to implement, a grant management program with the Battle Creek Community Foundation. Similar to what the police department has, it's reaped great benefits for them over the last few years. Any chance that we can get to increase our capacity with someone else's money, we'll take that to do whatever we can to make it better. Outside of personnel costs, our 2 largest expense areas are easily apparatus and our facilities. We were able to get into the fleet division's apparatus replacement program about 4 years ago, I believe. We are just now starting to actually pay into that, which led to a great increase in that fund from last year to FY24. We were also able to implement or include another engine company or fire truck into our budget request that in the end will allow us to have an up-to-date reserve apparatus. Reserve apparatus needs to be at the same standards as our frontline apparatus, and what we have right now, our two reserves are 27 years old, which are already outside of industry standards. So being able to have those two items was one of the things that saw a significant jump. Industry standard for fire station life is 45 to 50 years old. Our newest fire station will be 49 years old this year. Newest is already 49 years old. Our stations are outdated to say the least, and most are not in optimal locations for the Battle Creek of tomorrow and being able to provide an effective response force. To operate, maintain, let alone update buildings as old as these is very costly. We also live in them. Arguably, our fire stations are more occupied than every one of our regular homes are, because there is someone there 24/7 every single day. We work there as well as live there. One of the things that was a big boon for us in this budget going forward is we've created an asset management model that will allow us to try to maintain what we can with our current facilities as we work towards growth in the future, as well as the parts of living with them: snow blowers, lawn mowers, chairs, lights, so on and so forth. All those things that come with buildings as archaic as ours, those were able to be included in this going forward. That's what I have for next year. Do you have any questions?
Fire Station 3. When do we replace that? This year?
My personal opinion, yes, as soon as we can.
Okay.
But there's so many other factors that have to be looked at. You know, if we take that out of service, what do we do with it? You know, we can't just say we got to close it. We believe it needs closed. We believe it's lived well past its useful life as a fire station, but we also have to examine the other components that go along with what happens when we do close it.
Chief, it embarrasses me that we have people living in there, though. That's my only point.
Yes,
So,
sir. Thank you, sir.
Any other comments?
I just had a question in regards to the ladder trucks. There was a recent article about 7 municipalities or 7 ladder trucks in the area. We have 1, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Is there shared ladder truck in place, or?
No.
Okay.
If our apparatus goes down for an extended period of time, probably over about a week or so, we will actually get a hold of Bedford Township and Emmett Township, who have ladder trucks, let them know that ours is down, and they will then be included in initial response.
Okay.
When and if they are available, sure, as they are essentially volunteer fire departments.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Next up is Human Resources and Michelle Hull.
Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners, and Vice Mayor. Much like City Manager's office and the City Attorney's office, my department is small, and we do use general fund without generating any revenue. We do not see much change year over year, although in the last fiscal year we were approved for a new field safety officer, so a new headcount into my department, although it's graciously funded through DPW. One of the things that I did want to call out for the change from last year to this year is about a $60,000 increase in FY24 that's primarily allocated to our materials and software. And that's really focusing on our new recruitment efforts and some of the tools and resources that we're planning for next year. One of them being a new assessment software for applicants who are applying for city positions. So it really goes through their personality fit for the role and their career interests, so we compare them better with our openings. And then we've also going to be implementing a new skills survey, which is a online reference tool. And really, by moving to an online platform, we're more successful in receiving those references back versus making those phone calls and asking for somebody to return a phone call. And then lastly, I did ask to budget about $45,000 to explore options for replacing our current requisition applicant tracking software. The current platform is likely not to be supported much longer. So just earmarking some funds for that if our new ERP system doesn't come through with that. That's human resources, but I would like to share, in an upcoming slide, we're going to talk about the risk and self-insurance fund. So that is one fund that I'm responsible for helping develop the budget for. And I just want to give you a few call-outs for some changes for FY24 on that fund. Revenue up for the charge, for the self-insurance fund is really through internal charges for service on internal allocation models to all departments. But the fund covers multiple cost centers, so it's all of our health insurance, the medical, dental, vision, life, dental. There was less than 1% increase to medical insurance for FY24, or this calendar year, which will impact FY24. And then there was no increase to dental, no increase to vision, but we did have an increase to our life insurance premiums because we enhanced that benefit from 1-time annual base to 2 times annual base. General liability is in the self-insurance fund. Those are premiums for MMRMA and HUB that cover our liability insurance, so we do expect that to tick up just a little bit. Property insurance, we're estimating an increase there due to our increase in our appraised values for our city buildings and vehicles. And then it also covers risk management and workers' compensation. We do estimate an increase there because of increased salaries and also headcount and personnel. Lastly, general employee benefits. There's an increase there in professional fees and services with the introduction of the Protector program with brain health for fire and PD. So those were really the only ones I would call out.
Thank you, Michelle.
Yep.
Any questions of Michelle?
Other than, not so much a question, but about the medical, I hadn't heard that increase was very minimal, and that's good.
Very minimal.
And do we have any idea why that is? I mean, the hospitals, I'm assuming, are having to pay their people more and having a hard time. I guess, what's the industry buzz on the street about why that hasn't gone up?
You know, I think that's just our experience rating. The way that Gallagher Benefit Services is our benefits broker.
Okay.
So to work with them very closely on looking at our rates throughout all of our 3 different plans. But we also pull in our retiree base, which I think helps for our entire experience, helps brings our rates down.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I had one question. On the other department that you were talking about, what is the contributing to outside agency part all about? Because it shows 0 on the list from the year before. It was 292.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what list you're looking at.
Department 50 other, is it? And then it was 9670 is the business unit.
96. Is that my internal support to the other departments, Aaron?
Says contributions.
Page are you on, Commissioner?
I'm on page 5 of 5.
Which, are you in a
Of the
tab?
general expense fund.
Tab?
Yeah, tab
I
6.
don't have that.
Or, yeah, 6. It says 0, so I just wondered what happened with.
I don't have
Sorry.
that one in front
Sorry
of me.
about
I
that.
apologize.
Yeah,
That's okay.
It just piqued my interest because it went from $292, $100,000 to 0, so. Just want to make sure something.
I'll check on that one for
I
you,
just want to make sure
Commissioner,
something
because,
got missed.
yeah. And
With
it's
the
in the
li-
general fund, not in risk or,
Okay, so it's a
General-
different other fund than she was talking
so
about.
this would,
I do know what it is. I do
Okay.
know what it is. So there is a contribution that the general fund makes to fund some older police and fire retirees. The cost of their benefits or their health insurance on an annual basis. And to help soften the blow, this is one of the components of the police and fire pension millage rate. So we reduced this to 0 because we've accumulated some funds over previous years to help soften the blow of the police and fire pension millage.
Thank you.
I apologize, I didn't
I
have
just
the
want,
tab
you
up here.
just, yeah, you don't normally see a 0 there, so this.
Thank you, Michelle.
You're welcome.
thanks. Chad Frayne gets to come up. This is also his first, but this is a lot of firsts. This is his first budget workshop as well, as the director. How about that?
Perfect, thank you,
Okay.
Rebecca. Mayor, Commission, thank you. Under the umbrella of the IT department, we have 5 different budgets that I'm responsible for. 2 of those are under the...
Chad, can you step to the mic just a little bit?
Certainly.
Thank you.
So under the IT operations department, there are 2 budgets there. Both of those are on a chargeback model. And one is overseeing the telecommunications, all of the phone charges that we have. And then the other is for all the hardware and software and support for all other technology to the departments. It's for hardware and software that's used over every department throughout the city. We've been lucky enough in those two budgets there that there are only slight increases as we've been able to, we're still in license agreements and software agreements and standardizing on hardware and software with 3 to 4 or 5 year agreements. So there's only slight increases to those. And then the 311 budget, that's all general funded under there, and that's primarily personnel costs with minimal cost for office supplies and some technology costs there as well. The GIS department is separated under 2 different budgets. There's 3 employees that fall under the Department of Public Works budget, which is funded by water and sewer. And then there's the GIS manager and another specialist that's funded under another kind of IT budget, a GIS budget under the IT. And that is primarily TIFA dollars, and they support all other services outside of utilities. And then for fee bond insurance, it falls under the GIS department. We have not seen very much revenue come through that. I believe that's, the assumption is that our aerial imagery is from 2020, so it's kind of outdated, and there's findings more on the internet of better imagery of our area. So we're kind of looking at that to see if we can get some more revenue generated for the GIS department in that area. So that's all of our budgets in general, so if you have any questions.
Any questions of Chad? Did a good job, Chad.
Cool, thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Mayor. We will call Chief Bagley up for the Police Department.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Commissioners. I want to just highlight one of the things, the difference between the FY23 budget for Battle Creek Police Department and the FY24 budget. You're going to see a $224,000 approximate increase, and the most significant cause behind that increase was our vehicle and technology replacement that we had to take into consideration for this fiscal year. Excuse me. 12 of the vehicles were due for replacement. They're on a 5-year rotation. It's with the state, and that rotation is up this year. We had to increase that number to 5, or by 5, which brings us to a total of 17. The 5 additional vehicles actually brings our vehicle inventory up to where it should be as a result of our increase in getting our employees back to a level in which we hadn't seen in quite some time. So the last 3 to 4 years they've been operating. Our normal level is about a 109 for sworn personnel at the police department. We've been operating in the low 100s, in fact dropped down to the low 90s for the last several years, which impacted the need for fleet, and then we adjusted our budget as a result. So this year, unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess I could say, with the 17 new hires, we got our numbers back, and we needed to equip them for their patrol procedures. As far as a revenue standpoint, you'll see that a significant increase in our revenue. Most of our revenue is captured under, one, 302 funding for training, and secondly, we utilize a lot of grants to help offset our costs and provide services to the community. So the most significant increase to that was a $500,000+ grant. It's a Serve and Protect grant. It's in partnership with our Community Mental Health Summit Point, and we are in the process now of developing with our consultant our community-wide crisis response team, which is housed out of our Fusion Center, and will respond to mental health crises or substance abuse crises within our city. That's the largest increase you'll see as far as the, I think it was a jump of about 600 or 700,000 in the revenue side of it. As far as our records division and any fee increases, we did not raise a single fee for FOIAs or notary services, accidents, SOR registrations. No fee increases occurred in those at all. So that is all I have. Any questions?
Good job, Chief. Any questions to the Chief?
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. We get to welcome Duska Brum from Recreation.
Good evening. Short and sweet here, we are pretty consistent across the board from fiscal year '23 to fiscal year '24. We are hoping for a slight increase in revenues due to our programming numbers going up. We offer approximately 30 programs through the Recreation Department. We are fully funded by the general fund, but we are fortunate enough to capture revenue from our programming, from Willard Beach admissions, Flash Flood Water Park admissions, Bailey Park tournaments, field rentals, and the golf course is just going crazy right now. I think the pandemic, the only good thing out of the pandemic was golfing. So they have definitely increased their revenue. We have 6 full-time employees in our department. We are all doing more with less. We have tightened our belts, and you can kind of see that with a little a dip in our expenses. We're really hoping that we can stay the course with that as long as our facilities hold up. Budget changes, again, I think we're going to see pretty much the same thing across the board, and we are good to go. Questions for us?
Any questions of Jessica?
I just want to say I loved going into Full Blast and seeing it packed with all the different activities and programs going on there. And my daughter is actually going to be working for you this summer at the kids camp.
Awesome.
She got a job. She's really excited. They had some kind of orientation or testing or something tonight that she had to go over to, but she's really excited about that and glad to see so many people are participating in the programs.
Great. We're really looking forward to this summer with the refresh we did at the water park. We're really hoping to bring in some new people there for our community. Oh, and the fee bond schedule, we did not increase anything, so we're keeping it down for the community members. So.
And once again, New Year's Eve last year, Duska had an employee call in sick. And who took the place of that employee? Duska did.
Oh, my goodness.
That's what you do.
God bless her.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. Next up, we have, oh, Aaron. He's right next to me. He's just going to here. Yeah, I almost did.
Yeah.
Habit.
Yeah, she's kind of. Revenue services encompasses finance, purchasing, income tax, treasury and utility billing, facilities and reproduction, and assessing. In 2020 and 2021, the city eliminated 26 positions citywide in anticipation of the uncertainty surrounding COVID and revenue projections. 14 of those were in the group of departments that I just listed. In finance, the retention of the Assistant Revenue Services Director as a permanent position will be critical in our upcoming ERP replacement project, and will additionally assist the increasing reporting burden placed upon our finance staff by federal and state entities, as well as the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. The city has set aside ARPA funds and is getting ready to embark on the replacement of the city's ERP, which stands for Enterprise Resource Planning Software. It's our finance HR software. The current software is at the end of its useful life. It's no longer being marketed as a new product by the software company. A goal of the project is to make it easier for both internal and external customers to do business with the city. We have demos scheduled, finance, HR, and IT, to narrow down our selected vendors, our vendor of choice, and so hopefully get them started on that project this summer. Purchasing is status quo for fiscal year '24. However, there has been a lot of additional work for purchasing for the bidding of city ARPA projects. Chris Huff and her team have done an excellent job of keeping up with the added ARPA bidding requirements and walking city staff through the process appropriately. Income tax. As you saw earlier tonight, there's the addition of one auditor for fiscal year '24, and that's due to a large swath of revenue that is going uncollected across the city because there has not been the staffing capacity to put towards compliance. The auditor will be focused on compliance, and a revenue of $50,000 has been included for the additional revenue that will be generated by that position. Treasury and utility billing is status quo as well for fiscal year '24. Tammy Giannunzio and her team do an excellent job of handling the day-to-day responsibilities of utility billing, property tax collection, and being that first face that people see when they enter City Hall. Facilities and reproduction. Reproduction is our mailing and print shop. They will be status quo for fiscal year '24 as well. But however, there are and will be some exciting things happening across the city in terms of facilities. The City Hall exterior terracotta replacement is nearly complete. And later this year, work will begin to renovate the clerk and treasurer office suites on the first floor. That will dramatically change how residents do business with the city, and will also cause some temporary staff relocations while the renovation is happening. The retaining wall surrounding City Hall will be replaced this summer, and construction starts on that July 5th. The city contracts for assessing services with WCA Assessing. That's a relationship that began in 2021. That relationship has worked well for both WCA and the city over that time period. Aaron Powers and Andrew Falkenberg have done an outstanding job making sure all assessing duties are handled and keeping city staff apprised of any upcoming issues on the assessing front. Any questions?
Any questions of Aaron?
I do. Aaron, on the assessing, do you know what the bottom line is as far as the savings of eliminating that department and going with this other company?
You do?
Yeah, it's just a little shy of $500,000.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
And last but not least, and I don't think she needs any introduction because she's getting to be a regular at our podium.
Welcome
but
back.
Mallory Avis is going to talk about transit.
Okay, good evening. I will keep it brief since I'm the last one. So our transit budget is a little bit different than most of the other budgets. Nearly 80% of our revenues are from state or federal grants. And these are grants that are written to the legislature. They're not necessarily like competitive grants that we may not get next year. So for example, our federal funding is built into the bipartisan infrastructure law. Our state funding is built into Act 51 and comes from the Comprehensive Transportation Fund. The city's general fund is basically determined by figuring out what those eligible expenses are and how they relate to those state grants. So we have to estimate what our state grant revenues are. And so for example, our state grants are funded, they're determined by, say, roughly 35% of our eligible expenses. And then our federal grants require a dollar-for-dollar match. So we get $2 million in federal money, we need to match that with $2 million, and we can use that state money, that 35% we get from the state, to match that $2 million. Ultimately, the city has to make up the difference of where our operating expenses have a gap there. And for fiscal year '24, that's about 18% of our revenues. So the biggest difference in some of our budget that you'll see is for the last 3 years, beginning in fiscal year '20, the city general fund has had to contribute a very minimal amount, roughly $300,000 or less. And that's because we received 100% funding from CARES Act and ARPA money through COVID relief grants. So that allowed us to kind of stockpile some of our regular formula money that we get, and we lived off that for the last 3 years. But fiscal year '23 requires some general fund contribution, and then fiscal year '24 requires just over $1 million from the general fund. The only fees that we charge are obviously passenger fares, and then nominal fees for things like ID cards, rider ID cards. That again makes up less than 7% of our revenues, and the Commission and Public Transit Committee, they approve those fares. So there has been no change since July 1st of 2022, so there's no change to the fee bond and insurance schedule for transit. One important thing to note with our budget for fiscal year '24 is that that does reflect a full level of service. So currently, since December of 2022, we have not been at a full level of service. We have not been fully staffed. Our budget for fiscal year '24 reflects full staffing, full service levels, including midnight service and Saturday service, which currently is not happening. And fiscal year '23 obviously reflects lower expenses as a result of that. We currently have 9 open positions, and in 2022, we settled an agreement with ATU that resulted in some wage increases to help us be more competitive and attract and retain new drivers. And then we also entered into an agreement earlier this year that gives us some flexibility to hire both part-time drivers as well as non-CDL holders. So that gives us additional flexibility to recruit from a larger pool of candidates. Overall, our budget really has minor changes. Most of those changes come from maintenance costs, wages, and materials, so things like parts. Separately, we have the ITC fund, and so that's the Intermodal Transportation Center, Amtrak, and Greyhound. that account is mostly funded through rents paid by Amtrak. So Amtrak occupies about 70% of the building, and they pay 70% of the expenses for the building. Battle Creek Transit does pay a small portion of that because I'm going to say lease a little bit of that space as a break room for our drivers. And then we are currently discussing a lease option with Amtrak Police so that they can have an office within there that used to be occupied by Indian Trails, who no longer operates in Battle Creek. Greyhound pays a small amount of lease, about $500 per month, and that's basically just to give their patrons access to bathrooms and things like that inside, but they don't have a physical location. And our revenue from there is also generated by the parking system, which comes with its own issues. For example, it's currently not operational because somebody crashed into it. So we have small things like that that could generate revenue, but right now we're not seeing the revenue that's predicted. And that is all I have.
Any questions for Mallory?
I just have one. I'd just like to commend you for our discussion we had the other day, and that you actually take the bus to and from work. I think that is just wonderful that you're fully understanding what's going on by riding the bus system. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mallory.
Thanks. I hope you see we have an amazing senior staff team. They go above and beyond every day. I couldn't imagine being a city manager without this team. We've had our challenges from a budget perspective. We're also reaching that age where some of us are, leaving. Linda Morrison back there with her retirement smile. And so we really are focusing on succession planning as well as we see, kind of our workforce age. But this is a really top-notch team, and I appreciate working with them and all the work they do, so thank you. I'm going to turn it over. The next part is talking about other funds. We've been really focused on the general fund because that really does house a great deal of our operating expenses. But here's just a few updates from other funds, and I'll turn it to Aaron.
All right, really the only thing I wanted to touch on here, the funds we're watching closely, intermodal, reproduction, parking, and solid waste. Those are, as previously mentioned, there's ARPA transfers for lost revenue for the solid waste fund for both FY23 and FY24 due to that uptick in the fuel surcharge from Republic Services. There's also ARPA lost revenue transfers in the parking fund amounting to $420,000 for fiscal 23 and $435,000 for fiscal 24. So the revenues in the parking fund are a little bit artificially inflated by those ARPA dollars. I know staff is working diligently to find a solution to that issue. And so we have it broken out on here between special revenue funds, enterprise funds, and internal service funds. And I'd be happy to answer any questions about this particular slide.
I don't see any questions, Mayor. May we go on? Okay. Great. You've heard ARPA used a lot in a variety of contexts during this presentation. And we couldn't have survived the pandemic time without the one-time funds we received. As you heard, what it did for transit, areas of holes it plugged, which is what it was created to do, and it has. Marcy's team has certainly used Home ARP and other CARES Act funds, and so has the city. I think what probably this group is tired of me saying, and Linda and Aaron saying, is, but these are one-time funds. We don't want to build a general fund or any fund that we cannot support beyond ARPA dollars. And you see from the lost revenue perspective, we are contributing a great deal in this proposed budget, and so that won't always be there. So we're doing our best to put the city on a sustainable path to be able to support beyond ARPA. They have to be encumbered by the end of December 31st, 24, and expended by December 31st, 26. And they probably all memorize that, and Linda has it tattooed, I'm told, because we want to make sure that we're accounting for those dollars only one time. So in that, Ted is going to talk a little bit about our ARPA project funding, because certainly we had our internal city projects funded with ARPA dollars, as well as the community projects that the commission approved for ARPA support as well. So Ted?
All right, thank you. And of course, as the commission is well aware, in 2020, we did receive roughly $30.5 million in actually, what technically were called fiscal recovery funds. We generally just refer to them as our ARPA funds. And as Rebecca indicated, we have a relatively short window to spend, to both obligate and spend those funds, and we need to be done by December of '26. And actually, after quite a bit of internal and external engagement, the city ultimately allocated all of its ARPA funds across a variety of city and community projects. And so, Vicki, you can go to the next slide if you would. So cities are allowed to use a portion or designate a portion of their ARPA allocation to replace, I guess, what we'll call revenue loss. And in our case, that is a $10 million figure. And those dollars are the most flexible dollars within ARPA, as we're allowed to use those basically for just general government services. And this slide provides an overview of how we're deploying our lost revenue dollars. And actually, Aaron was just touching on some of this. You can see that some of those dollars have been used to support essential workers. We have supported the general fund, as Rebecca indicated, with ARPA funding, the parking fund, and then, of course, you can see the contributions that are anticipated to the solid waste fund on that slide as a result of the decision to use ARPA funds to offset the increases in fuel charges that we've been experiencing. One thing I would just note about this slide real quick, too, when you look at the committed column, you see 7.3, not 10 million, and that is because we are using some of our lost revenue dollars to support specific city projects, which you'll see on a slide in just a second here. So next slide, if you would, Vicki. Thank you. So this slide provides a summary of our public ARPA projects, right? And I think commissioners are fairly familiar with most of these projects. We have distributed about 40% of the money at this point. All of the projects are active with the exception of just a couple of them, and we do have an ongoing dialogue with those folks as well as they're prepping to move forward on their projects. You know, we're not quite to the halfway point with December of '24 on the horizon, but in most cases, these projects are going well, and I know the Commission sees the weekly report that we get from our ARPA project manager generally in Rebecca's weekend summary. And then next slide, if you would, Vicki. And this last slide really just provides information on the city projects that we have going. And again, most of our city projects are underway at this point. And again, if you do the math here, you'll note that the 15.1 million approved budget, including and then adding in the 10 million lost revenue and the 8 million in public projects actually adds up to more than 30.5 million. But again, that is because we are using some of our lost revenue on city projects. So you can see we've expended about half of our funds there. We have some additional funds earmarked, and it's still a small portion that's unexpended. But again, most of those projects are well underway and will certainly be completed well in advance of the deadlines. And that's it for ARPA, unless there are any questions.
Any questions of Ted?
I do. Ted,
Yeah.
with the House discussing about clawing back ARPA funds, are we in a position to give that back? Or where will we stand on that?
I think that would be a very difficult situation for us because we've really obligated our funds at this point. I mean, there are expectations both from city and from public users that these funds will be available. So I guess, and I'm sure Rebecca and Aaron will chime in if they want to, but I really hope that that doesn't happen because we've already made our obligations.
Thanks, Ted.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay, a little bit about priority-based budgeting. You know, I think this commission is well aware about our community results. Really, we implemented priority-based budgeting fully in 2016, and it was to make sure that we could share with our community that the resources that we have, taxpayer dollars, are being spent towards those services that are most important to our community, staff, and elected officials. And so really, that's the premise and the heart of priority-based budgeting. And we continue to use that as we look at resource allocation. So when the commission changed our community results just a little bit, we had to go back through and then rescore all of the programs that we have according to those community results. And I hope you see that that's important because we want to make sure that those general areas, we are aligning our spending, our resources towards that. So we have identified 490 departmental programs in our priority-based budgeting database. We score each one of our programs using, as I said, those community results as well as the basic program attributes, which are part of the PBB program. It is first scored by the department and then by a peer review team. And that was put into place so that somebody could not perhaps over-elevate their resources in a certain area, but they had to justify it to their peers against what we were asked to score against, the results as well as the basic program attributes. And it's been so successful that we now use that for the capital improvement program as well. We score all of our capital projects against the PBB results as well. This year, since we don't have a new community results, we just really focused on scoring any new projects going forward, of which we do not have any for fiscal year 24. Next slide, please. Thank you. PBB is based on a quartile system, and I think the hardest thing for all of us to grapple with early on is that the quartiles don't mean that number 1 is the best and number 4 is the worst. What it means is these are the areas that scored the highest against our community results and basic program attributes. So just because you had something in quartile 4 doesn't necessarily mean it's not a good project or program that needs to advance or a service that needs to continue. But what basically the PBB program tells us is you do want the majority of your resources going into quartile 1 and 2, and clearly we have that in the scoring and in our most recent PBB work. We recently trained on some new tools that PBB has. We weren't really able to implement those fully this year, the Insights program, but they will help us in future budgets, which we plan to start a little bit earlier for fiscal year 25. And it gives us some opportunity for partnerships as well as looking at mandated services in a different way. Next slide, please. That's really everything we wanted to share with the commission. I'm going to leave you with just a few future budget thoughts. We know that the property tax revenue continues to look stable, which is a good thing. We went a long time with just stagnant, no growth, which is very difficult because the cost of providing the services hasn't been stagnant with no growth. So while we know and we believe probably next year we will also be headed to another 5% increase in 2024, which is the max. And that's a good thing, that is a really good thing. But we also need to kind of think about that in managing the impact of our police and fire pension millage on the city operating millage. I think Ted did a really good job kind of sharing what that looks like going forward and kind of the concern we have and why we're always watching that, the operating portion of our millage because we retain a lot of that for the general fund. Income tax, yeah, we've had a lot of discussion, as Aaron said and as Linda has said, about what that looks like. It continues to defy expectations. I don't know why, but it allows us to be a little bit more aggressive with those numbers, but we will continue to watch that closely. And we intend to continue our quarterly budget to actual report to the commission because I think that's very helpful so that we are keeping our expenditures aligned with what you've appropriated. The Consensus Revenue Estimating Conference is coming up. It's my favorite month. Vice Mayor Sophia often shares all the good nuggets of information just before it's about to start. Aaron and I can sit through that. I love it, and most people don't make it the entire way. But we will see where that lies in relation to the governor's budget. What we're really looking at is what she has proposed in state shared revenue. It's a lot higher than what Treasury is showing right now, and we use the Treasury conservative numbers, but we certainly will watch that from the May Revenue Estimating Conference. And then lastly, you heard, and there's that word dismal again, the parking fund has taken just a giant, enormous hit because of COVID. And you can see that when you go to the ramps, and they're very underutilized, allowing some, I think I said before, nefarious activities to happen in that. And so I know that the Small Business Development Team, the Parking Committee, as I said before, Ted and John, and we're all trying to put our heads together about ways to improve that. And so that's a to be continued, and we will continue to keep the commission apprised. So that is our presentation. Our next steps, if you don't have any questions, we want to make sure that we're on the right track with this proposal. But we know the next step for us is a public hearing. That's May 16th. That's at our next commission meeting as required to present the budget formally to the public and then kind of more officially to the commission. And then we would look to the June 6th meeting for a resolution to consider the adoption by the commission.
Questions of Rebecca? Chris?
Not so much a question. We've already had a meeting to go over into the weeds on some of these things, and I appreciate that opportunity. I don't remember having done that before, and that was very helpful. In the past, my experience with the budget has seen, starting off, I guess, about 15 years ago when I was first on the commission, well, different lifetime, that police and fire pension millage was ratcheting up every year, and I think for as far back as you look, it just kept going up. I missed the last 2 years of decreases, which is fabulous. And so my position had always been, if that police and fire pension millage floats up, then adjusting the general operating accordingly to keep overall tax levels for our citizens the same. You mentioned it's a good thing we're going to get another 5% next year. I'm looking at it from a standpoint of, for our residents, not necessarily a good thing. That affects everyone's pocketbooks, especially when our wages aren't growing as fast as inflation. And that being said, I guess I would have previously tended to recommend a corresponding reduction in the operating, but this year I'm great with your proposal because it's still not at that highest level from 2 years ago, which it ratcheted down. So, and the number that was shared with me in our meeting was, I think that .255, $305,000.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yep.
And we are already dipping into our general fund balance, a considerable amount this year, so I don't think it really can absorb too much more. Hearing from all the different departments, they've tightened their belts and not increasing fees and those kind of things. So I think this is pretty solid. So thanks for your time and effort and everyone putting this together.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Any other comments? Workshop's adjourned. Excuse me, are there any public comments? I do not see any public comments. Is that all right, Jill? Thank you. Meeting's adjourned.